$30,000 to water personal services overtime from water capital water system improvements. Mr. DeWine, I'd also like to add that Councilors Clark, Boschman, and Bean are present, as well as Mayor Di Natale.
Thanks for your knowledge.
I knew I forgot something. Mr. DeWine.
Good evening, councilors. Essentially what I'm looking to do is transfer $30,000 from the water system improvements line item into our overtime account. We had budgeted, or I had budgeted, $95,000 for this year, and at this point now we're down to, right through today, Dick actually brought a printout of where we're at. We're down to about $8,000 in that account. Much of the overtime due to water main breaks last fall, and also some issues with Verizon. We had some call-ins because of communication issues at our facilities when they had an incident with a line on Wallace Road that necessitated us responding to communication failures to our facilities. So, but the primary reason was the unusually high number of water main breaks that we experienced early fall to mid-fall last year that actually occurred on holiday weekends. Labor Day weekend, we had a 24-inch water main break on Ridge Road, and also during that week, some other issues on Marshall Street. That week alone, we had 300 hours of overtime. So,
Why isn't this request coming out of, let's say, heating fuel? I'm looking at the status sheet through January, and there is a balance of $112,000 in there. Projection is based on the spend rate. It's going to finish at like $100,000 to leave $70,000 left. Why are we rating water system improvements when we have poor infrastructure instead of looking at another account like heating fuel?
Heating fuel is, we're in the brunt of the winter system season now, so most of our monies will be spent in January, February, and March up until that point. So it's kind of skewed how the money comes out of that particular line item. So
Even with the oil prices down?
Yeah, even we had budgeted based on not as high a price as been in the past, and in fact they have dropped down. But the amount that we pay, and I don't have that exact amount per gallon. We're kind of stuck with that amount, even though they've dropped afterwards. So.
Okay. What were we going to do with that $150,000 for water system improvements?
We basically been. It's not enough to do a water main project, but I've been upgrading some of the pressure reducing valves that really need to be upgraded in some of our stations, some pump improvements, and we've also used it for example, the Water Street Bridge where we had a water main break there. We upgraded and installed a new water main in one of the bridge sections there. So,
okay. Council Boschman.
I got a couple of questions. How you been?
Good.
To my knowledge, right now in the city of Pittsburgh, we have 350 homes that are vacant plus. Could you tell me if is all the water shut off in all these homes? Do you know of?
That's something I couldn't answer tonight. I believe that anything that we know that is vacant, we will have shut off if the owner requests it. We hesitate to shut off water to a dwelling unless there is a request by the owner or unless there actually is a leak at that location that we're aware of. Because sometimes the water is needed for a boiler system to operate that when there is, some loss of water in that system.
All right. Now, my other question is this. As a city, how long do we wait to turn off somebody? How far do you have to be behind on your water bill before we turn off the city water?
Counselor, is this question relevant to the overtime being transferred?
Oh, no, it's not.
Let's keep it to the transfer from water system improvements to overtime.
All right, take that back then. Sorry, man.
Motion to approve 1516.
Second. Motion made and seconded to approve 15-16. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
016-16, in order to approve the expenditure of funds from the Massachusetts Department of Public Health Bureau of Substance Abuse for the FY16 First Responder Narcan Grant in the approximate amount of $12,750. Chief Martineau.
Good evening, councilors. Good evening, Mayor. This is one approval of funds I wish I wasn't sitting here asking for. We had a competitive grant that we applied for through the Department of Public Health, and we were awarded the $12,750 for nasal Narcan for police officers in the field. As I said, this is a grant I wish I didn't have to sit here in front of you and ask for approval to expend. There's no denying that the state and the country's in an epidemic crisis with opiates, and this $12,750 will go a long way within the Fitchburg Police Department for us to stockpile nasal Narcan. Currently, that $12,705 will allow us to buy almost 250 doses of nasal Narcan. Currently, there's a shelf life of approximately 24 months, so we should get some extended use out of this grant money.
Councilor Bean.
Yeah, I mean, as we said, the governor has made it a top priority within the state. It is an issue, something that we face here in Fitchburg. Could you just tell me how many times that we've had to use Narcan, and then how many deaths we had so far with opioid abuse?
We started recording nasal Narcan. The Fitchburg Police Department went live with all patrol officers in the field carrying nasal Narcan. We went live with that program in June of 2015. Since June of 2015, the Fitchburg Police Department has deployed nasal Narcan over 40 times. During that time, also, for the last couple of years, we've been keeping statistical data on suspected overdoses. Keep in mind, a lot of times an overdose that results in a death won't get classified as an overdose for over a year. So I can tell you in 2015, we had an estimated total of 198 overdoses in the city of Fitchburg. In that time, prior to that, 2014 and 2015, the deaths haven't been released from the Department of Public Health. Needless to say, we're no different than any other city in the Commonwealth. We have some problems here, and we're attacking it on many different fronts, from educational services to enforcement services. I've said many times the opioid crisis is an epidemic that has many tangible arms working on it. And the nasal Narcan is not a panacea, but it's also giving us the opportunity to extend someone's life that's in crisis.
198, well, those are deaths?
No, suspected overdoses.
Suspected overdose. Okay, how many deaths do we have related to that? Any idea?
I can't comment on that because in 2015, those haven't been classified as of yet.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
President Kuchmarek.
Chief, I certainly agree it's a tragedy that we even need these funds along with any other county municipality in Massachusetts, but the reality is we certainly do for this purpose. That said, I want to congratulate you. You and your department do a great job throughout the year coming before us, having been awarded a large number of grants to improve the quality of life for our residents and to be able to respond to epidemics like this one. That said, was this... did we already budget funds for Narcan this year? And if so, are we able to take $1,200 and reallocate it elsewhere this year, or were we aware going into the budget season that
there was no allocation for funds? This is something that's providing us an opportunity to move forward and look to the future for the next 24 months.
Understood. Do we have? Will this give us? Do we have an existing inventory as it is of Narcan?
We do have some on hand at the police department. The fire department has their own resources for allocating funds for Narcan. They also use an injector, paramedics. So between the fire department and the police department, the people of Fitchburg are very well protected when we're responding to these type of crises out in the community.
Great. And our new student police officers are being sent through the academy. When they come out of the academy, are they trained on how to use Narcan?
They're trained at the academy, and they receive additional training at the police department.
Great. Can any of these funds be used for professional development for that purposes too?
Some of it is, very little. $1,500 out of that $12,750 can be allocated towards training and related materials.
Great. Thank you, Chief.
You're welcome.
Councilor Joseph.
I guess you answered part of my question. The fire department has their own source, but what about the school department and Board of Health and stuff like that? Do they have their own source for Narcan? Is this something that we could share with the school department? Is there...
I've had slight discussion with the superintendent in this regards, whether it was necessary to have Narcan available at our public schools. I reiterated to the superintendent of schools, we're very fortunate. We live in a city where there's a lot of resources. At any given time, I can have a police officer or a paramedic or an EMT at any one of our schools in a very quickly. They're all prepared to reverse an overdose of an opiate crisis. I'd be more than happy to share my Narcan with anybody in the city, because it's there for our residents' protection. So I have had communication with the superintendent. There's been no discussion on where we're going to move forward, if it's going to be available to our school departments. But
Okay, seems to be another hot topic, not just, parents coming in, all kinds of things happen in the school system, and that's why I think they found there might be a need for it.
I know the public library did some training on Narcan. It's the talk of town, unfortunately. I hate having this as the talk of town, because this means people are dying. It's
Right.
affecting everybody.
Okay, thanks.
Counselor Bean.
So when you mentioned the 40 times the police department has used Narcan, do we know how many times the other departments have, or do you know who the city person is responsible for the overall watching of the opioid issue, or do we have
I
somebody?
think we're doing it independently. I mean, I'm very fortunate to have a crime analysis on my staff at the police department, so she's providing statistical data when it comes to overdoses. And there's, quite frankly, there's not a lot of cities and towns across the state that are doing this currently. Most of your major cities are compiling data on opiate issues, but some of your smaller communities aren't. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of these tragedies are happening. So I can speak on behalf of the police department. I can't speak on behalf of Chief Roy and the fire department, how they're maintaining their data. But as far as the police department data goes, you're going to see a subsection of this year in my annual report regarding the crisis. And we've broken it down to how many incidents are happening on Sundays, Mondays. We're trying to coordinate some of our statistical data that I can better prepare our force to go out and meet these circumstances.
Okay. I'll share with you, today we released, I'm on the MMA, Mass Municipal Association Board, and we released a report on the opioid crisis in Massachusetts, and I'll get you a copy of that. But my concern was, here in the city, is there somebody taking all the information from the Board of Health, from the fire departments, the police, to look at it in one central location? Is there one person doing that or not? Or
I don't believe so.
it may be something we want to look at,
It could
because
be. The Board of Health does their certain things
Right.
through Mr. Curry. The police department's doing their own statistical data. I mean, I can't. Yeah, there's. It's
I just
like
think there should be a centralized place, but
Yeah.
I guess we'd have to talk to the mayor about that at some point. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Counselor Beazle.
Thank you. Chief, follow up on Councilor Joseph question. How many hours does it, when you talk about the training, how many hours of training does it take to actually teach somebody to observe? What is an overdose? What does it look like compared to like a seizure or something like that? Is it?
We're trained more on the administering the nasal Narcan. The one thing that's nice about this drug is you can't hurt anybody. If they're not in an opiate crisis and we deliver nasal Narcan, it's not going to hurt them, but it will reverse an opiate overdose. Training-wise, we're doing about a 4-hour block. It's extremely easy to do. They hold classes monthly up at Community Health Connections. It's an extremely easy class to do. There's not a lot to it. But as far as recognizing the difference between an opiate overdose or a seizure or that, we're not trained paramedics. We're basic responders, and that's where we rely on the expertise of the fire department and the paramedics are responding. However, administering it immediately, we can't hurt anybody. It will reverse it, though.
All right, thank you.
Motion to approve 16.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to approve 016-16. All those in favor? Opposed? It is unanimous.
Thank you.
17-16, an order appropriate $250,000, same to be charged against available funds and credited to accounts as follows: $40,000 to DPW snow and ice personal services overtime and $210,000 to DPW snow and ice expenses. Commissioner Laxo.
Thank you.
I was hoping we weren't going to see you this year.
No such luck.
Yeah.
I mean, as usual, we started off the year with $400,000. Usually it runs out by the time we hit the month of January. This particular year, even though we didn't have much snow in December or January, we did have to spend a lot on pre-winter prep, and a lot of that was leftover expenses from last year. Last year we had spent over $1.5 million in snow and ice, and since we were running a deficit, we pretty much stopped spending money last spring on repairs, and we didn't fill the salt shed. But once the new fiscal year rolled around, we had to get the trucks ready and fill up the salt shed. The state gave the cities and towns an incentive to fill their salt sheds earlier this year so that we would avoid shortages in the winter like everybody experienced last year. So we still were able to live within the original $400,000 until Friday and yesterday, and I passed out an update before the meeting, which shows that we're now in the red as far as the snow and ice account goes.
Even with this supplement, we would still be well below the annual average. My thought on this is I think we need to start getting more smarter. We need to start getting more smart with how we budget accounts like this. Every year we put a blanket $400,000 in here. When 95% certainty, that's not going to cut it. There's an argument to be made that, well, if we put more in the budget at the front end, we are restricting our available funds for that current year. But the way I see it is I'd rather have less available funds if there was sufficient coverage in these accounts where we didn't have to worry about releasing funds for snow and ice as opposed to using it for something else. So I would gladly relinquish available funds if these budgets were budgeted accurately, and they're not. So even if we added $200,000 to these accounts, it's better than $4, and it's $200,000 less that we don't have to worry about coming out of this list. So, and that goes for a lot of other accounts here. So I hope that methodology changes because it's a poor one. It's a poor one at best.
Just a couple of weeks ago, the MMA came out with best practices for cities and towns, and that was one of them, was to provide a realistic snow and ice budget.
And I know it's hard to ascertain what that's going to be, but I'd say start with the average as a baseline because it covers ups, it covers downs, and then if we go over the average, at least we'd be closer to reality than $400,000. It sounds like $400,000 gets you maintenance, repairs, salt shed fill up, and then maybe one and a half storms, and then we're done. I mean, I don't know about anybody else here, but I don't recall when we had a winter with one storm. So it's just highly unlikely that would happen. Thank you. President Kuchmarek.
Commissioner Lazo, personally, I'd just like to thank you and your entire department for your work and efforts throughout the winter season to keep our roads clear and safe. As always, you do a tremendous job and a great service to the city. That said, you spoke a little bit about some deferred maintenance from last year going into this year. You spoke about filling up the salt shed. I'm seeing almost $100,000 to plows and blades. Can you just give me a sense of, can you break that down and delineate a little bit further of, what is that $100,000 used for? Is it new plows or new blades? I'm a little bit ignorant about what that expense would be used for, and I'll let you take it from there.
I mean, for the most part, it's repairs to our vehicles. Most of our vehicles are very old, so they require a lot of repair. They take a beating every winter, so almost all of that money is just for parts, and we do almost all the work ourselves in the garage.
Can you tell me, are we often at the point with these vehicles where we're spending more to repair and maintain than it would just to buy a new vehicle?
Yeah, I mean, some of those might be reaching that point. A couple of years ago, we bought 2 new Sanders and plow trucks, which has been a big help. Plus, we were fortunate where one of our private plow contractors has 5 or 6 large trucks, so that kind of takes some of the burden off our own fleet. So we're much better shape than we were.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Councilor Bean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, I just wanted to say thank you for the work that you and your staff have done during the storms. I mean, in years prior, I can always remember years ago when I was a councilor, there always had lists of people waiting for streets to be plowed and cleared, and those days gone by. It appears that the people out there are very responsive and do a great job. It's interesting when I come in from other towns into Fitchburg now, if I come in from Lunenburg, it's actually our streets are better than theirs, which has not been the case in the past. So appreciate the good work you guys do out there and the efficiencies that you've been able to create to make it happen. So thank you.
Yeah, it's a tough job. The guys put in a lot of 24-hour shifts, like last night from 7 a.m. Monday to 7 a.m. Tuesday, and it wears on them, but they're always willing to be out there.
But it pays off and it looks good, which is good.
Councilor Joseph.
I can agree with Councilor Bean that the streets are looking pretty bad. I get flack every time I say that from one resident somewhere, but is it possible to set up a revolving fund with monies that are sent back from the state when we have the emergency, the state of emergencies, and we get those big storms like we had last year, and we get FEMA money and stuff like that? And I think right now that money just goes back into the general fund, correct?
No, we did, usually there are options that the state will allow the city to use it in different ways. Either it goes in the general fund, or you can set it aside and restrict it to cover some of cover or offset some of the expenses. Last year, the money that we are due from FEMA, it's about $170,000 or so that we budgeted out of our expenses. So we have that money from last year. Those expenses were allowed to be carried over, knowing that we would get reimbursement from that grant. So it varies. Usually it's treated as a grant, so we can move these expenses from this account into the grant account. So it frees up the regular general budget.
So the 170 that we're anticipating,
Maybe 150.
the money that we're anticipating getting from last year's storm is already in this year's budget?
It's already shown. It was removed from at the end of this year, of fiscal year 15. That money was transferred from the deficit in the snow and ice from that year into a grant account. So that expense was allowed to be put into a grant account. So it shows as a negative $150,000 in a grant account. And what happens is when we get the more than $150,000 will have to be put into that account to make it zero, and then any extra will go into the general fund.
So is it possible to set up instead of a grant account, a revolving account where any monies that come back that we've already expended would go into a snow and ice revolving account and then pay for future storms that we would have the next year? I mean, say we get 100, say we get 200 back instead of 150. Would we be able to keep that other 50 into snow and ice?
I don't believe so. Usually it's revolving funds are usually based on local receipts that we get for different types of services provided. Animal control, we have a revolving fund for that. Senior center, trying to think of some of the others.
Athletics, I know
Right.
that. Yeah.
So this is totally not a local receipt. It's a receipt from the federal government or the state. So it's every year is different. It's like the ice storm. Fortunately, that year we brought in, over time, we eventually got over $2 million, and it covered most of the cost of the storm. And the numbers are hard to tell because you get reimbursed in that situation. You got reimbursed for the use of our vehicles or use of generators, which helped.
Councilor Hay.
They didn't get the answer I wanted,
sorry.
but that's fine.
Well, you can't set up a revolving fund.
No, you
That's
can't.
the answer.
Okay.
Councilor Hay.
Thank you. Following up on Council President Kuchmerik's question, Lenny. Well, first off, as all the other councilors, said, kudos to you and your staff for the job you've been doing. Streets are cleared. Long storms are difficult, and you guys are doing good work with that.
Thanks.
But following up on Councilor Kuchmerik, when he talks about your inventory of plows and machines and stuff, some of them are big ticket items. It costs a lot. Do we, when we buy something new, do we inventory it in some manner that says, this is how long, this is a shelf life, we expect it to go this many miles, or this number of years, or this number of hours?
Yeah, I mean, the type of vehicles that we buy, they usually last, a long time, 20 years or so.
Okay, so, but even if you figure out a big-ticket item is going to last 20 years, do we then start to try to, each year, put in the budget some money to put away so that when that big-ticket item doesn't last any longer, that we have money in reserve to buy that? Or do we just always wait and then at the end look to get the whole chunk at once? And I know it's not ultimately your decisions, but you could put it into the budget and then the mayor would either approve it or disapprove it. I think it's a good way for us to start saving in advance for some of those big-ticket items, as opposed to just waiting to the end and then getting hit with a big bill.
Yeah, I mean, usually we've been paying for vehicles out of Chapter 90 funds or from bonds issued by the city,
Okay.
as opposed to putting money away like a private business would do.
I'd prefer to put the money away and buy it rather than taking bonds. And the Chapter 90 money could go towards other things. It's a long-range plan that I think we need to start putting into effect with your equipment, with the police equipment, with fire trucks, and those types of things. And I think it helps us out in the long run. Thank you.
I think, Counselor, what you're talking about might be for stabilization.
That would be one way to
We,
use some
we
stabilization.
I think we have a poor track record of future planning for capital expenses. We rely strictly on loans, and I know, based on the city's poor financial history, that if you utter the words, take money out of stabilization, everyone runs for the hills. But believe it or not, stabilization is there to be used for things like that, and in drips and drabs. And taking money out of stabilization is not a bad practice. Taking it all out is a bad practice, or using it to pay for recurring expenses is, which we used to do.
One-time
Yeah,
expenses
but
are fine.
every year we should put away $100,000, $200,000 into that account, and then the next time it happens, instead of taking out a $100,000 loan to give Chief Martineau 3 police vehicles, or Chief Roy a new fire truck, or a small truck, or Mr. Laxo equipment, we don't have to take out a bond and incur 25 years of interest at 2 or 3%. So
I would agree.
yeah, so
Motion to approve 1716.
motion made and seconded to approve 1716. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It is unanimous. Hopefully this is it. 2216, a petition, Vincent Pusateri II, City Solicitor, to do the following: establish an order reallocating funds from the Labor Negotiator Fund account to the Litigation and Special Counsel Fund account. Authorize the Law Department to use funds to hire as Special Counsel Attorney William Traynor to handle workers' compensation cases on behalf of the city, and authorize the Law Department to use said funds to hire as Special Counsel Attorney John Barrett to continue the smooth transition of the Law Department duties. Councilors, Mr. Pusateri, Solicitor Pusateri called me this afternoon and stated that he could not be here due to a personal commitment, but from what I gather, this is a interdepartmental transfer. There is significant funds remaining in the labor negotiator account, of which the solicitor would like to move to a special counsel account to hire on a per diem basis when needed these two individuals to work on said matters in unemployment, workers' compensation cases, and the former solicitor's assistance with some of the transition work that is required. So these aren't new funds; these are just existing funds that he'd like to move to other accounts. President Kuchmarek.
I believe in the past, if memory serves me well, we haven't effectively used the special counsel line item too effectively in the past. Typically, at the end of the year, we have funds available. I think this is a great use of, the city solicitor. In any case, in most cities, they're jacks of all trade. They understand a little bit about everything. This is a chance where we get to employ a specialist and make sure that we're putting our best foot forward as a city, and really putting a specialist in front to make sure we can win these cases wherever we need. So I think this is a positive expenditure for us. We budget the funds for a reason. We should be using them, and in this case, I think we'll be using them effectively moving forward.
Councilor Joseph.
I guess I've never really heard of using previous city solicitor to help with the transition to a new one. I mean, we do still have the same assistant city solicitor that I think could help with the transition probably just as well as the city solicitor could. So I don't know the use of that to help with Attorney Barrett. I guess my question on the workman's compensation cases is to what do we have in the pipeline, and I would like to hopefully maybe get a executive session so we can find out what is in there for workman's comp cases. And as far as whether he wants to put it in labor negotiator or special counsel, I guess that's his prerogative if he's got the funds. But the other two I do have questions on. What do we have for outstanding? Do we have outstanding workman's comp cases that are probably going to cost us a lot of money? And I think that maybe we should be using Mr. Goldstein a little bit to do the transition.
Is that all, Council? Councilor Hay?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have any issue with the transfer of funds. I think that the city solicitor needs some latitude with what he's going to do and who to bring on in special circumstances. I do have a question, though, that it's rare that something comes before finance in a petition form like this about a transfer of funds that doesn't have an amount attached to it.
I think I don't even think the transfer of funds is required. I think it's more informational. Right. I believe the petition was to satisfy the requirement of the law department. Whenever they hire special counsel, they get the approval of the city council and the mayor to hire special counsel. It's like when we hired the individual for the FAA claim.
Yep. Okay.
That's really the gist of this petition.
Thank you.
Councilor Bezal?
Thank you. I guess following up on Councilor Joseph said, my assumption is we already have a company that handles our workman's comp cases. So this is just the workman's comp cases that we're not being able to work out with the company that we have. Is that correct? Or?
We do have a company, it's like a third-party administrator. It's Cook & Company. They assist the city on claims, and they also review all the bills and approve the payments to individuals on comp and pay those medical bills, and we reimburse them. But on the city side, there is quite a bit of effort put in by the legal department to legally handle these claims. There's quite a bit of involvement that's been done in the past, and they work in partnership with Cook & Company, the lawyers or the administrators. So that is what this is more for, whether or not to settle a claim, to argue the claim before a judge. That's what I believe this would be, that type of thing.
Okay, would you happen to know if the agreement that we have with that company actually allows us to mediate our own personal doctors to look at cases individually, or is it?
I think the city is the one that calls the shots, ultimately, because they work for us. And so if we wanted to, depending on the strategy that the law department chooses, taking into account their advice from the third party, because they're very experienced.
Okay. Mayor, did you want to speak?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. To answer some of the questions, the account contains $35,000. I think what the solicitor is anticipating is those two individuals costing around $7,500. And again, we're learning very quickly in the first month we've been in office that there's a lot of information, there's a lot of issues that are going on in the city that require the solicitor. I know Councilor Joseph mentioned the assistant city solicitor. Attorney Goldstein is really his bailiwick, if you will, is housing court, and he does an outstanding job at that. So some of these details, some of these cases that that the solicitor is asking that Attorney Barrett be available for, to help with transitional issues and institutional knowledge. Mr. Barrett, I mean, let's face it, over 20 years. So he's quite a resource, and being able to get on the phone and call him, and like any attorney, he's going to be, those are billable hours. So again, we're not adding anything. That line item is there at $35,000. He's looking at utilizing $7,500 of that, and that's an approximation. But as I said, we're learning that the workers' comp issue itself, we're looking for that specialist because they're that detailed, and there's, you keep hearing the term low-hanging fruit. This is some low-hanging fruit. If we get somebody who's paying attention, we can save the city a substantial amount of money. So we're hoping to get that from Mr. Trainer. Thank you.
Is Mr. Barrett's assistance going to be an ongoing, recurring item, or is that going to have a shelf life?
Well, I would have to say, without conferring with the solicitor, that it will have a finite time frame to it.
Okay.
All right.
President Kushmer.
I'll just say, speaking to the utilization of services from former Solicitor Barrett, I think it's just always good to make sure we're ensuring a smooth transition between not only administrations but between positions. Like any attorney, as the mayor mentioned, they like to get paid for their services, and certainly I can't blame them. But certainly we have a new city solicitor. It's an important role in the city. I want to make sure that that person is completely up to speed on any items that may have been in the backlog, and making sure that we're consistent in our approach and our rulings, because that's how we lose cases in court, when we're not consistent as a city, when it looks like we don't have a firm opinion or stance on something. And certainly when it comes to legal writings, whether it be ordinances or otherwise, want to make sure the tone sounds correct, that we're writing things the correct way, that there's consistency between the two. So certainly, as long as it's for a finite period, I appreciate that Attorney Barrett is willing to work with Solicitor Pusateri.
I would second Councilor Joseph's call for holding an executive session at some point to get the full understanding of just how many of these cases we have and what's on Mr. Pusateri and Mr. Pusateri's plate. That would be helpful.
Make a 2216. Oh, you adopted.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to approve 2216. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It is unanimous.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to adjourn. Oh, yes. Mr. Saracen.
I just wanted to point out one item on the available funds, just to bring into the attention of the council. We added, for other possible future needs, you'll see we've added employee fringe benefits. We're seeing that the health insurance account and unemployment are running tight, and they may go over. So it is possible that we'll be coming in for more money for some of those accounts. But it is early, and once we have more information, we'll be back. We'll keep you apprised.
Motion has been made and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.